in the sense of inflation targeting, if you look at it, if I come from a union background, my question is parochial in the sense where I come from. Why did we lose nearly 900,000 jobs? It's my job to ask that question if I'm coming from a union. And it's not that inflation targeting is to blame, but I don't think there's been sufficient discussion about what are the issues around it. Why was South Africa, that's why I said earlier, why was South Africa an outlier? We didn't have a banking failure. So the impact of our recession, why did we have a disproportionate loss of jobs? And we need to understand that. Why are we ready to lose jobs in that way? And so on. So my question is that inflation targeting has perhaps been set up rather than as a vehicle through which you tackle a problem, as an absolute, as the vehicle, not the objective. And I think that it's important, and it's why the bank has at this moment, I refer to it just in passing in relation to the shareholder issue, a program of discussing with everybody to ensure that we are talking to people, answering their questions, listening to the issues, because people are experiencing things in a particular way that must help us see what the issues are from different angles. We have looked at inflation targeting in the sense of, they're two different things. The responsibility of a central bank, all of them, irrespective of where they are. And for ourselves, it comes as a mandate from the Constitution, is to tackle inflation. Inflation targeting is a tool by which you do that. And we shouldn't get confused between the need to tackle inflation. Inflation erodes the well-being of people. It is very bad for the poor. It creates a vicious cycle. If you have inflation that's high, wages follow that. Your real question, your real return is not there. You just keep chasing paper. And we all know this is bad for the economy. What is the right level? We've determined it in terms of government setting the policy in consultation with the bank between 3 and 6%. Some people argue that could be raised. The question for me is anchoring inflation expectations. Inflation targeting is a tool. The approach that we have is a flexible inflation target environment which says what is happening in the economy. What are the things that we need to do? How quickly? And if we are not in the target band, explain why we're not in, what we're seeing, and how we plan to get there. And the minute you're in the band, or when you're consistently within the band, you have room to tackle other issues. So if you have lower inflation, your ability to make some adjustments that relate to growth potentials or whatever is there, because you're not countering high inflation. The more you've got high inflation, the more you have to concentrate on that question of how do you bring inflation into the band. So for me, changing the band is not really the issue, because if you're outside of it, you explain it and you get an objective. What you're trying to do is anchor inflation expectations so that we have a trajectory of a downward expectation. And part of that is people's experience. You can't anchor inflation between 3 and 6% if people's experience is that it's at 15. It's not going to happen. So the lower you can get it, the more realistic it is, the more people's experience is that this is what it is. And therefore, you start to expect it to go down. That affects the wage setting and everything else. So for me, that's the one level. The second thing why I think inflation targeting is very good. And you have both a minister and a deputy minister here. We're a central bank, the representatives in the central bank, a governor and deputy governors are not elected, right? These are officials who are appointed. And therefore, what is your accountability? When you have inflation targeting, every 2 months, I as governor have to stand up before the public and answer to what we have set as a goal. It's hugely important that a central bank is accountable. It's one of the vehicles to make you publicly accountable. You know, people think that this transparency is new. As long ago or as near ago as mid-1990s, the US Fed wouldn't even announce what their position was. You would have to decipher it in the market by what was happening. There's a huge change in the transparency that's taken place. And for me, it's a tool about how you influence expectations. There can be no question, whatever you set it at, you've got to tackle inflation. because that is your mandate, that is your purpose as a central bank anyway. And you can see that there's a change within inflation targeting environments and central banks that don't, for a greater transparency, a greater accountability. And for us not to get confused between the objective of tackling inflation and having a low inflation environment and the tool through which you do that. And for me, the accountability and the transparency is very, very important as a vehicle. I don't think that while ministers and deputy ministers and presidents have to stand up before Parliament, it's a question of actually measuring you every time you stand up. This is what you said you saw. How has it gone? Why is it different? And you're under scrutiny, and I think that's very, very important. So for me, if you don't have an explicit inflation target, you have an implicit one. And therefore you're going to do the same thing. You just don't do it in the same public or transparent way.